Alright, here we go. Programming in tmux for beginners. So tmux is a program that lets you have multiple terminals inside your terminal. So here I have 1, 2, 3 different terminal windows inside my actual terminal. And so I basically read the tmux manual every night. You get something new after each reading. And one day I was reading it and I came across the wait for command. And I was like, what is this for? Like, what would you possibly need to have a locking system inside tmux? And so I had a terrible thought, which is, surely tmux is Turing complete, right? And it turns out it is. There's a feature in tmux called hooks, which says, hey, after this event happens, then perform this action. In this case, hey, when I split a window, apply a particular layout. But it turns out that you can say, hey, when I navigate to a particular window, do this action, and part of that action can be navigate to the next window. And then that can trigger another hook, and so on. And so tmux will sit there navigating through windows. And so naturally, I made a brainfuck to tmux compiler. This is brainfuck. It's like a Turing machine. It's inscrutable. And so my compiler turns that into a tmux config file that looks basically like this. And each one has a next window. And to do conditionals and loops and stuff, instead of jumping to the next window, you just jump either like up or down a certain number of windows. And so you can see this is the output of the program. It prints hello world, and you can see down the bottom there, those are all the windows that are storing the instructions. But like brainfuck is cool, but Python is way cooler. And so I also wrote a compiler that takes a Python program and turns it into a tmux config file. So to do this, I needed a stack-based virtual machine to evaluate complex operations like this. A stack-based virtual machine basically means we have a stack of values, and each operation happens to the lowest value in that stack, and then eventually you do all the operations and you get the result. tmux doesn't have a stack built in, but it does have a thing called buffers. You're supposed to use these for like copy paste, but you can basically just use them as a stack. You can read the value of the topmost buffer with the buffer sample variable, and you can pop the topmost buffer with delete buffer command. So everything is actually just worked out through careful coordination of the contents of this stack. But after I did all this, I realized that setting hooks is actually nowhere near as good as using key bindings. With a key binding, I can actually show something on the screen while the program is running, rather than swapping between a whole bunch of different windows. How this works is we run a tmux session inside another tmux session. The outer tmux session sends keyboard events to the inner tmux session, which then handles them as keyboard shortcuts and sends actions back to the outer tmux session. All the computation is happening in the background from what we're actually looking at. I use this approach to make a Sudoku solver entirely within tmux, but I do not have time to get into that right now. That's neat, but it's still just text, and what I want is a real display. You see these windows at the bottom? Turns out you can actually just reformat how those appear. The default is just the name of the program running, but you can change them to be something like a colored square, which maybe you might call a pixel. So here I have one row of pixels down the bottom of my screen, and if I run tmux inside tmux, I get 2 rows of pixels, and then if I run tmux inside that, I get 3 rows of pixels, and I repeat that like 50 times, I get an image. And then it's just a matter of changing the pixels a few times a second, and we can play a video. But like, that's nothing, because what we've got is input, display, and logic, which really you put that together and you have a game engine. And so I did the natural thing, which is to implement Snake entirely within tmux. Every pixel here is a tmux window. All of the logic is in tmux. The keyboard input handling is just tmux input. It tracks your score. The snake gets longer. The game gets faster. And if you eat yourself, the game's over, all inside tmux. Best of all, it's actually only 140 lines of tmux config to implement Snake, compared to my actual tmux config that I use day to day, which is 192 lines. If you want to learn way more about all the details here, you can read more on my blog.